Now, she's never seen a chameleon before, so she doesn't know what it is because she's lived in the ocean her whole life. And the chameleon, well, does more than an actual chameleon does. He can actually change clothes too in this story. So they set up a giant runway so that they can show off their fashion to each other. But every time she shows up with her outfit, the chameleon shows up with the exact same outfit. So she keeps trying to out-fashion the chameleon every single time. But he just keeps on coming out with more and more of the same. So until she gets so exhausted and runs out of outfits that she gives up, thinking to herself, okay, I clearly can't beat the servants, which means I can't beat the master. So that means the master must be the most fashionable person in the universe, so I clearly can't win. So I'm never going to do this again. Well, that makes me wonder, why would you challenge the person who created you to a contest? Because I'm pretty sure the guy who made you can also do what you do. I just never get that kind of logic. But here's a bit of a darker hues. This features more Ahia, as you can see. The crying man in the image is King Menri, son of King Eri that I mentioned before, of the Igbo kingdom. Now remember how I said that they could only have free food for a generation? This is the story that came out as a consequence of that. Menri demanded of Chukwu that he be given free food just like his father's kingdom was in the previous generation. So Chukwu got really annoyed by all this demanding. So he said, okay, I'll take your eldest son and your eldest daughter as payment for this. Kill them, bury them, and from their bodies will sprout endless food-producing trees. So Menri's like, okay, I'm not gonna do that. So he goes behind Chukwu's back and kills one male slave and one female slave and buries them instead. Then when Ahia comes, she sprouts yam and cocoa yam. So they have free food. So eventually, Chukwu goes to Allah, the earth goddess who's also an underworld deity. It's like, hey, I don't see their souls anywhere. And I was like, I never received the souls of Menri's two kids. So Chukwu, of course, gets very annoyed with this. So he sends Ahia and Onu and another death god of Munabali, since a crime was committed because they tried to trick God. Tricking God would technically be a crime. So he says, I know what you did, and I never received actual payments. I will give you more free food, but I'm actually going to take your eldest son and eldest daughter. So they get killed by the death gods and taken away, while Ahia grows palm oil and coconut and coconut fruits from their bodies. As you can see, he's crying because his son is literally being turned into a tree before his very eyes. And as further punishment, Menri had to make sure to share the wealth of this free food with every single Igbo society, which is a story that's used to explain why the Igbo kingdom became a breadbasket to trade with all the Igbo communities. The thing about this kingdom was that it had no army, because it was a commercial kingdom. Like, it would trade with everything, which is why it had no defense when the British came in, because it had very few military. All it could do was hire mercenaries. So it lasted by being a theological empire and a commercial empire. Being the head of religion, because we can say, hey, Chukwu helped us build our kingdom. And Chukwu made us have all this harvest. So don't attack us if you want to piss off Chukwu. So that's why they weren't attacked by anybody for 1,000 years, because everyone believed that attacking the city would be like angering the very God that they all worshipped. Which is a pretty good defense, in my opinion. But this is a more famous story. Has anyone ever heard this story before? Of how the tortoise cracked his shell? Oh, this is a really fun one. Now keep in mind, in Igbo mythology, all animals can talk. So this was a year when there was a very bad harvest, and no one could eat except the birds. So Kingfisher, the bird, decided to hold a giant feast in the sky for all his bird friends. So the tortoise wants to go, but he obviously can't fly. But most of the birds around him do not have any sense of etiquette, and the tortoise is usually a wise person. So they all go to tortoise and say, hey, what's the proper thing to say to kingfisher? He's one of the king birds in the sky. Tortoise is like, I'll be a spokesperson for you. And they said, how? Give me each a piece of your wings so I can fly with you to kingfisher's banquet. But here's the thing you birds all have to remember. What's that? You often have to have fancy titles at these dinner parties. They're like, oh, okay, what's your fancy title going to be? I said, my fancy title is going to be all of you. So tortoise flew up with them to the sky, where they were holding the banquet. Now in Igbo tradition, when you're having a feast, and when you're presenting the food, a common thing to say is, who is this food for? So, and the host will say, the food is for all of you. You can see where this is going. So when they were set out, tortoise said, oh, that means my title is all of you. That means all of this food belongs to me exclusively. Now, this actually happened 4 times before the rest of the birds caught on. So what they did was they took all of his feathers and literally kicked him out of the sky. So as he was falling to the sky, he begged the birds, who he had just ticked off, to send a message to his wife to bring out all the pillows and soft things to soften his landing. So the birds were like, okay, we'll go talk to your wife. So they flew down, talked to his wife, and said, hey, your husband's fallen from the sky. He requested that you bring out all the sharp things in your house, the knives, the forks, the hammers, the nails, and just put them right here on this giant spot where he's gonna land. And she's like, are you sure? He's like, we're simple birds, we don't know how to lie. So he fell and, well, his shell cracked into tons of pieces. So he and his wife had to glue the shell back together. So that's how we get the story of why the tortoise shell looks like it does in most West African folk tales. Tortoise in most stories is usually a trickster. Think of Coyote from Native American myths, or Loki from Norse mythology. He's the guy that's smart, but will often try to pull one over on you. Whenever you find stories on your own, he's always trying to pull one over, like trying to trick the elephant into giving up its watering hole, trying to trick the god of the night into extending daylight time because he wanted to be able to have parties longer. But it always backfired on him and he never seemed to learn. Which is probably why the god of chaotic and stupid war used him as his symbol. Because 2 idiots who think they're smarter than they actually are probably hang well together. How much time do I actually study? Oh wow, I went through more than I had. But I guess I can give you a few more minutes before we go into questions. Would any of you all like that?
Yes, we would.
Okay, so this is the story of the girl and the silver spoon. Now there was a woman who was betrothed to marry off a handsome young man, but she refused and wanted to run away. So she went to a local juju man. Juju man being, think of like a shaman or a priest, or someone who contacts the spirit. So he says that, okay, you want it, but in exchange, I want your ability to speak. So he gives her a spoon, and she just eats with it, but the silver spoon becomes fused to her tongue. So she walks around trying to talk to people, but she can't because she's literally got a spoon stuck in her mouth for most of her life. So the only way to do this is to go back to her parents. That's the only way the spell is going to get lifted, by agreeing to the proposal her parents had set out for her. Now this is not a very nice story, but times were technically different back then. You had to do what your parents had to say all the time. So she accepted the marriage and the spoon fell off. I'm not sure if the marriage ended up being happy or not, but she ended up with no more spoon in her mouth. That's what, yes. There is the story of how the sun and moon ended up in the sky. It's one of those other silly and stupid myths. So, Anyanwu decided to have a big party in her house. And she said that her house was so big that she could have any number of guests in it. And the moon, who was her fellow host, said, okay, who are we going to invite? And she said, I'm going to invite Idemili, the ocean goddess, yes. And she can bring every single one of her friends into my house. So Idemili first comes in, and the water is up to everyone's kneecaps. And then Idemili's like, are you sure I can invite more? Then the sun is like, yeah, come on in. So even when the water is at the waist height, Anya still says, my house can accommodate everyone. And even it gets so bad to the point that Anya would have to sit on the roof of their house. And Anya says, I can still have more guests. I am the best party planner in the universe. So it's like, they definitely bring every single one of your guests into the house. And I was like, okay, sure. So there's no space in the house. So the only place is literally the sky. So sun and moon have to jump into the sky and stay there because the house is so flooded that they can't ever go back. Which is the story of how the sun and moon ended up in the sky. And like I said, these Igbo gods, they may be gods, but they are very silly, very comical, very, oh my goodness, they're like a sitcom family.
It's like the Greeks and the Norse.
Yes! Which I think are the best gods, the ones that are flawed and are very silly that you can relate to. And I have one more before we go into questions. And this is the story from my village of, actually it's a bit of a murder case involving a monster. Now, this is a specific scary kind of monster. And although I won't say much of its name because it's very hard to pronounce right now. But it's a monster that affects children. It was described as the reason for sudden infant death syndrome. So what happened was a woman got jealous that she couldn't have kids and the local neighbor was having kids. So she petitioned to have that spirit be sent into to her neighbor so that that neighbor would have constant miscarriages for the rest of her life. And the bad thing about the spirit is that the only way to dispose of it is to either find the totem or to find the body of the first child inhabited and dice it. But you have to dice it the right way, otherwise the child's body comes up and attacks you and strangles the mother until she dies. So what happened was, Ekwensu and Ogunabali were actually wandering the land. And Ogunabali was going around because he could sense a crime was happening because all these souls on these unborn children were coming around for no reason. They weren't supposed to be dead. So they go to the village where this is happening, and Ogunabali is like, why is there all this child death in this village? They're not on my list. Why is this happening? So Ekwensu decides to disguise himself as a lady who just had a child and dresses up Ogunabali as a baby. So the woman that was actually causing all this actually falls for it, and she plants the totem. And when the monster actually comes, Ekwensu catches it and says, who sent you? And when they find the actual criminal, Ogunabali's like, yeah, so I'm going to take your soul and send you to basically our equivalent of hell because you caused a lot of misery. So they had to give a lot of compensation to the woman who had been suffering all these miscarriages and gave her children that will forever be healthy and children who will only die only of old age as recompense. Funny thing about these gods, you can talk to them like they're business CEOs or corporations. You can actually vote on them to see if they're doing a good job. Like you could have a local god that if they weren't doing a good enough job, you could write a letter of complaint to be sent to Chukwu to revoke their access to be the deity of your local area. So the god would have two choices. Either change the work ethic basically, or leave that village forever and get a spirit or god to take their place. So you literally like vote them out of godhood for that area. Which means that the gods in Igbo culture had to have a habit of serving you more than you serving them. Except for Chukwu, he's the top guy. He doesn't have to serve nobody. As you see, he gets very annoyed when you try. So that's the final story. Sorry I ended on such a horrid note, but I'm willing to accept questions now. and list my sources. Here's where you can get some of these tales. A good book I recommend, yes?
No, go ahead, go ahead.
A good book I recommend is an anthology of Igbo myths by Udobata Onunwa. You can actually find this book in the African History Museum in DC, around the Smithsonian. You can request it. You can also get some of these from the University of South Carolina archives. I also recommend Magic, Religion, and Iron Technology in Pre-Colonial Northwest Igbo Land by Muka and Njaku. Or, if you have the ability and you can buy plane tickets, you can fly to Nigeria and ask the local storytellers yourself, as they are a direct primary source for some of these stories that I got. Now, does anyone actually have any questions? Yes?
So I noticed that a lot of the myths that you mentioned involving animals bear a lot of resemblance to things that are like in Aesop's fables. Do you think that the European culture borrowed this because of the trade with the Igbo?
Probably, but some of the Aesop's fables have been documented before the European trade expeditions to Africa. So I believe that most of the Aesop's fables came about on their own, because the trade didn't happen until the 1400s, and most of the Aesop's fables can be traced back to the 1200s and 1300s. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? Yes?
There do appear to be some types of parallels with the Yoruba gods and goddesses. Although there's one goddess of the ocean and the river, but it does seem like she does have many attributes. It would be a combination of ocean and Yama. And of course the main god being a lightning god as well. Was there a lot of trade between Igbo and Yoruba?
Yes, there actually was a lot of trade between the Igbo and Yoruba, but they had a proxy. If you've ever heard of the Benin people, the Kingdom of Benin was a huge trade center between the two, so a lot got conflated. Especially the one I mentioned, Mami Wata or Idemili. Her conflated name is Mami Wata all across West Africa. Her Igbo name is Idemili. So this god is one that is shared between many different cultures that all live along the coast. The Yoruba also had cities and ports along the coast, so they had the same gods and the same goddess as the Igbo did. You'll find that in a lot of cultures, specifically where that happens. Although her origin is suspected to be from the old Songhai and Mali empires, which had a reach that went all the way into Nigeria. So it's possible that they first heard about her from there, and then they adapted her to their own culture, similar to how you hear a lot of gods that got influenced by the Romans when they had their empire spread. So that's to answer your question. Before I get to you, he had a question?
I did. So modern Nigeria is an amalgam that's put together from colonial pressure,
Yes.
conference, and subsequent things. The Igbo culture is the southern part of Nigeria today, but does it extend elsewhere? How big? What's the land?
The Igbos can be mostly found in southeast Nigeria, but due to the transatlantic trade and other factors such as the civil war they had in the 60s, a lot of the Igbos are now spread worldwide. You will actually find lots of them in the UK and in the US. The UK is primarily because, well, they were part of they were under the influence of the British Empire and were often conscripted to fight in World War I and World War II. In campaigns, since Germany had a lot of territories in Africa, they were often consigned to fight there. And in World War II, a lot of them were actually conscripted to fight in India against the Japanese forces. And there's actually, if you look it up, there's some funny war stories where the Japanese thought the local Nigerians were Oni because they had never seen black people before. Now, you had a question?
The Igbo religion and the myths, has there ever been any on-screen representation of Igbo, like literally any shows or movies or any visual representation?
Not outside Nigeria, as far as I'm aware, no. Nigeria has its own film industry called Nollywood, where it produces over about 3,000 films per year. So a lot of these stories are made by independent directors or independent artists. So if they're made by Igbos, you will have some influence and representation of some of these old Igbo gods, but from a Christian perspective. Because of a lot of syncretization, a lot of the old gods, when the missionaries grew up, were taught to be bad, pagan, heathen. So when I talk about these stories, these are from pre-colonial versions of the stories. So if you ever see an Hollywood depiction of Ekwensu, it's probably of the Christianized version of him as the devil, where he's doing evil things. Where if you will rarely ever find a pre-colonial movie or TV show where he's his old silly self that prefers to make a market deal with you. Yes, you have a question?
Yes, you had mentioned the water god, woman made of water. There's a very similar description of Ganga, who is the one of the goddesses in the area around the Indus River in the subcontinent. I was curious if you knew that, since again, some of the stories seem to have sort of common motifs. Was there any trade between the peoples of Nigeria and the peoples of the subcontinent of India?
Not that I'm aware. I think they might have had them through proxy, because East Africa definitely had trade with India. And East Africa also traded with Central and West Africa. They never traded with the southern part because of the huge forest that was a natural barrier, but they definitely traded. So there is some possibility that there was some trade, especially considering how old Igbo culture has been found to be and how old we know Indian culture to be. And we know of the ancient Kush and Nubian empires in East Africa that lived around the same time as Egypt. So there may have been some, for lack of a better term, cross-pollination of stories. But I am not an expert on that particular subject, but thank you for asking that. I actually will try and look into that. Anyone? Yes, you have a question.
Are you aware that there are several storytelling groups in the area that would just love to hear you?
I'm not aware, but I will.
Are you a local person now?
Yes, I do live in Baltimore.
I'm sorry, you live in Baltimore. Well, I will give you a card, and you can do with it what you wish. If you want us to contact you or whatever, you can easily have that done.
All right, I would certainly love to share these stories. The more these stories are shared, the less chance they have to fall into obscurity.